Okay, today we're going to be working on percent problems using equations. The past few nights we've been using percent proportions, okay? But today we're going to focus on equations. So the first thing we have to know is an equation has to have an equal sign. And the key thing that we're going to look at when we're trying to solve percent problems using equations is the percent of the total will always equal the part. So the percentage of the total will equal the part. So we're just going to do a couple examples together just so we know how to set up an equation. So let's look at our first example. What is 39% of 377? So how you set this up as an equation is you write it the way that you read it, looking for the key words. So what is stands for your equal sign. What is 39%? So we write 39% as its decimal of means multiplication, 377. So what is 39% of 377? So before you do this, you should be thinking logically, what should my x be? 39% of 377. So it obviously has to be less than whatever 50% is. So you can just put that into your calculator, 39 hundredths times 377. So x is 147 and 3 hundredths. Let's look at our next one. 18% of what number is 81? So again, you just read it from left to right, so you write it from left to right. 18% is 18 hundredths. Of means multiply. 18 hundredths of what number is 81? So 18% of what is going to give you 81? So again, logically, you should be thinking, if 18% of something gives me 81, well then logically that x has to be something much bigger than 81. So you solve this just like you solve regular equations. You want to get your x by itself. So you want to get rid of the 18 hundredths by using the inverse operation. So we put that into our calculator. 81 divided by 18 hundredths. So x is 450. So 18% of 450 will give you 81. Let's look at the next two. Again, left to right, 32%, 32 hundredths. Of means multiply. 40 is means equal. What number? And we just plug it into our calculator and solve our equation. 32% of 40, I know is going to be less than 20, since 50% of 40 is 20. So x is 12 and 8 tenths. And logically, I already know that that makes sense. And our last example, what percent of 200 is 45? What percent of 200 is 45? So now we're solving for a percentage, which is very important to recognize. So we get rid of our 200 by doing the inverse operation. We plug 45 divided by 200 into our calculator. And we get x equals 0.225, but we're solving for a percentage, which tells me I have to move my decimal 2 spots over. So x is 22.5%. Okay? So just to kind of go back a little bit and talk about the last few days we've talked about proportions. If I go back and look at my first example, I'm going to set that up as a proportion. 39 over 100 is equal to, let's get rid of my little arrow here, is equal to what is 39% of 377. So if you know how to set up a proportion, that actually, you can use that to help you set up the equation. This is read as what is 39% of 377. You can also read it as 39% of 377 is what number? 39% of 377 is what number? And that's exactly how we write the equation. 39% of 377 is what number? And you can do the same thing for any of these. So if we're looking at this example, write it as a proportion, 18% over 100. 18% of what number is 81? So now we have the x on the bottom here. So then we want to just say 18% of what number is 81. So if we look at our equation, 18% of what number is 81. So we can also use proportions to help us set up our equations as well. So let's look at a couple word problems. So let's look at the first one. A ski resort begins the season with 60% of its trails that are open. There are 27 trails open. How many trails does a ski resort have? So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what don't we know here? What has to stand for our X? So since the question is saying, how many trails does a ski resort have? So X is obviously going to stand for the total trails. So that's the first thing you want to write down. Next, you want to look for, what is your percent actually talking about? So we look in here and we see it says 60% of its trails. 60% of its trails are open. Okay, so 60%, 0.60, of means multiply, its trails. So what are they referring to as its trails? Its trails is talking about the total trails. So 60% of its trails are open. Are open. Well, how many trails are open? There's 27 that are open. So there is your equation. 60% of your total is your part. And then just to show it using our proportion, 60% out of 100, 60% is talking about the trails that are open, which we know is 27. So then you can say 60% of what is 27, which is exactly how we have it written. So in order to solve this, you just divide both sides by 0.60, and we get X is 45 total trails. Oops. Let's look at our next example. A plane flies with 54% of its seats empty. If 81 seats are empty, what is the total number of seats on the plane? So again, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what don't you know? What are we trying to solve for? What does the X actually stand for? So if you look at the question, it says, what is the total number of seats on the plane? So the first thing I want you to get used to writing down is, what does your X stand for? So the X is the total seats. Then look inside the problem and see what when you look at the percentage, what is it actually telling you? So a plane flies with 54% of its seats. 54% of its seats are empty. So now I'm going to use that to write my equation. 54% of its seats, of its total seats. 54% of its total are empty. Well, there's 81 that are empty. 54% of the total is the part. And again, if you want to help yourself by using a proportion, so you can see it, 54 over 100, 54% of the seats are empty, so 81 are empty. 54% of what? Of the total is the part. So then we go ahead and solve it. Divide both sides by 0.54. And we get 81 divided by 0.54. We get that there's 150 seats on the plane, which makes sense because 81 of them are empty, so we have to have more than 81 on the plane. All right, we have two more examples to look at. Of 3,072 teens surveyed, 2,212 say they read for fun. What percent of the teens surveyed say they read for fun? So again, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what don't you know? What is the X going to stand for here? So it's clearly asking, what percent of the teens surveyed say they read for fun? So now you're solving for a percent. So the percent that read for fun. Okay. So what do we know? We know that there's 3,072 teens that were surveyed, and 2,212 say they read for fun. So when you're writing an equation, remember it's the percent of the total equals the part. The percent of the total, there's 3,072 teens, equals 2,212 teens. The percent of the total equals how many kids read for fun. And again, you can always set up your proportion and say x over 100, where the x is representing the percent that read for fun. So there's 2,212 that read for fun out of 3,072. Percent of is 2,212. So again, you want to divide both sides by 3,072, and you want to make sure you realize that you're solving for a percentage. So when you use your calculator to divide this out, 3,072, you get x equals, now this is going to be a decimal that keeps going on forever. So we want to make sure that we move the decimal twice, and then I'm going to have you round to the nearest whole number. So this is x is about 72%. Let's look at our last example. It rained 75 days last year. About what percent of the year was rainy? So the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what don't you know? So the first thing we want to define is our x. So we're solving for the percent of the year that was rainy. So we know that 75 days last year it rained. So again, when we write an equation, it's the percent of your total equals your part. So your total is going to represent how many days are in a year. So x times 365 days in a year equals that there were 75 rainy days. So we want to divide both sides by 365. And remember that we're solving for a percent, so we want to make sure that we move the decimal at the end. So again, this is a decimal that does not come out as a whole number. So it comes out, move the decimal twice, round it to the nearest whole number, so x is about 21%. So it rained 21% of the year, so it rained 75 days out of 365. So this is how we use percent equations to solve percent problems. You can also use percent proportions to help you figure out how to set up your percent equation.